The most painful punishments in human history. The traditional punishments of hanging, burning, and stoning are well known to us all. What if you are truly wronged by someone, though? Extremely cruel techniques of torture and executions have come and gone over the years. There are also some that remain with us still. Human imagination has always been capable of conjuring up a novel's worth of horrifying ways to punish suspected sinners, villains, witches, and anybody else who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Please refrain from trying this at home while we tell you about these 15 horrifying forms of torture and execution. 15. The upright jerker. An intriguing variation of a traditional execution technique was the upright jerker. While hanging is a common punishment across the entire world, its effectiveness is far from ideal. It can be a very slow and uncomfortable manner to pass away depending on the weight of the victim, the rope, the trapdoor, and several other circumstances. What is the remedy, you ask? Reverse the process! The upright jerker was a modified hanging mechanism that swiftly jerked the condemned into the air using heavy weights and pulleys. This was intended to be a quicker and more efficient approach to break the neck. But it didn't always go according to plan. 14. Falling. When someone wrongs you, what is the first thing that springs to your mind? Toss them over a cliff, of course. For generations, this has been a straightforward remedy for obstructive inconveniences. Although it has mostly lost favor, Iran still uses this technique for public executions. 13. Execution by elephants. There is no disputing the efficiency of this oddly particular execution strategy. As you might expect, it was widespread in South and Southeast Asia, and other regions where elephants are naturally present. In order to guarantee the trampling was as brutal as possible, elephants were frequently taught. 12. Ling Shi. Ling Shi, which translates to slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts, was a cruel execution technique used in China. The condemned was bound to a post and gradually stripped of flesh and limbs, usually ending with a last cut to the heart or decapitation. It was in use for over 1,000 years, beginning as early as the 10th century. Fortunately, it was outlawed in 1905. Ling Chi was only used for offenses that were thought to be particularly terrible, like treason. This method of execution was used by several Westerners. The idea itself has continued to emerge in many different forms of media, even after the practice was made illegal. 11. Blood Eagle. The Nordic legends of Viking executions are where the blood eagle originates. The ribs were shattered and twisted upwards to resemble wings after being accessed through a cut in the condemned person's back. Then salt was poured into the wound, making matters worse. Then, as a finishing blow, the lungs were removed and effectively wrapped over the rib wings. Fortunately, there is a discussion about whether this procedure took place or is merely a myth. In either case, it's horrifying that someone would spend the effort to come up with this. 10. Keel hauling. The Dutch Navy developed keel hauling, a sort of punishment designed exclusively for sailors in the late 16th century. Offenders were dragged underwater from one end of the ship to the other while being bound with rope. Although the technique resulted in many deaths from drowning or internal wounds, it wasn't always intended to be fatal. Additionally, those who were subjected to keel hauling punishments frequently suffered ruthless cuts from barnacles on the keel of the ship, and had to live with the scars for the rest of their lives, if they were still alive. 9. Boiling. Today, shellfish are the only food that gets cooked alive. However, from East Asia to England, it was a widely used means of execution centuries ago. After being stripped, the condemned was put in a vat or pot of boiling liquid, commonly water, oil, or tar. The offender might also be submerged in cool liquid and then heated to a boil for a more horrifying experience. Records from Henry VIII's reign revealed that some prisoners were boiled for up to 2 hours before they passed away. 8. Rat torture. Rat torture appears to still exist in the minds of creative people, as it was recently shown in the movies Too Fast, Too Furious and Game of Thrones. A hungry and/or ill rat is placed in a bucket on the victim's exposed stomach or chest in this horrifying and, I'll admit, ingenious form of torture. The poor person's flesh and whatever organs it came into contact with are subsequently chewed through by the frenzied rat as the bucket is heated from the outside. If you are still watching this video, click on that bell icon right now to avoid missing out on our future content. 7. Execution vans. China has astonishingly improved the efficiency of the death penalty. However, given that China performs the most executions worldwide each year, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Tax fraud, arson, and prostitution are just a few of the offenses that can result in a death penalty. In China, a lot of executions are now carried out in a mobile execution unit, vans carrying the restraints and chemicals needed for a lethal injection. These vehicles, which resemble standard police vans, have been driving around for 10 years. They are numerous and distribute fatal punishment near the crime scenes throughout the nation. Chinese officials claim that these alternatives to more traditional facilities are less expensive and more merciful than the other execution option: death by firing squad. 6. Gridiron. In essence, the gridiron served as a barbecue. It was put over a fire or a bed of coals to roast individuals and had the typical iron grid appearance. To ensure appropriate broiling, some persons were even dipped in oil prior. But don't worry, nobody ate them thereafter. Or at least we hope so. 5. Drawing and quartering. Drawing and quartering is one of the most notorious forms of cruel and unusual punishment. In the 13th century, England was where the penalty was first applied. The accused was drawn, typically hanged, possibly disemboweled or beheaded after being tethered to a horse and hauled to the gallows. The condemned was then quartered or had his body divided into 4 halves. This was frequently done by attaching each limb to a separate horse and forcing them to go the opposite directions. This penalty, which was only applied to treasonous offenders, was eliminated in 1867. 4. Strappado. Unlike many of the other forms of torture on this list, strappado is unpleasant and doesn't always result in death. The offender is strapped up behind the head by the wrists in strappado. In the unlikely event that an excruciating dislocation of the shoulders is avoided despite the difficult angle, weights may be added. Strappado has been used far into the 21st century and is thought to have its roots in the Inquisition of the Middle Ages. 3. White room torture. White torture can refer to any psychological suffering in general, but the connotation is more literal in this context. In the form of sensory deprivation known as white torture, a prisoner's cell, clothes, and even food are completely white. Lights are left on continuously, guards are dressed entirely in white, and no words are exchanged. No hue is discernible. Amir Fakhravar, who was detained in his native country of Iran in 2004 and tortured with white sand for around 8 months, is a case in point. When compared to the other forms of torture on this list, sensory deprivation's physical suffering is rather mild, but the psychological harm it causes is indescribable. According to Fakhravar, who was liberated, he was no longer a normal person and could not even recall his parents' features. 2. Poena colli. Another peculiar method of execution was the sack penalty, also known as poena colli. In case of parricide, which is the killing of one's parents or another immediate family member, it was applied in ancient Rome. The condemned was stuffed into a leather bag with a rooster, a dog, a monkey, a snake, and other creatures. The entire bag was then thrown into a body of water. If the claimed murderer wasn't killed by the animals, drowning most certainly would. 1. Scaphism. One of the most dreadful, agonizing, and skin-crawling forms of torture was scaphism. The Greeks claimed it was a Persian retribution, and if they were to be believed, the Persians were nuts. This method of execution involved trapping the defendant between two boats or inside a hollowed-out tree trunk and forcing milk and honey into their stomach. That section doesn't seem too horrible, so okay. However, the diet of milk and honey eventually led to terrible diarrhea that persisted inside the wooden enclosure. And with that, we come to the end of this video. Let us know in the comments which punishment you found the most horrifying, and also drop below any other forms of interesting and terrifying punishments. If you liked this video, do not forget to smash that like button, share this video, and also subscribe to our channel. Refer to other videos on our channel as well. Until next time, stay tuned.